Hi, this is Julie with Beadaholique, and I want to show you how to make the Mayan Revival bracelet. This was a design I came up with when I was trying to figure out something I could do with these two-hole pyramids because I love them and I wanted to incorporate them into bead weaving. So I came up with this stitch, and it's just kind of evolved as I was going, and I really like how it turned out. As you'll see in the video, the stitch is really loose and a bit wobbly, so I had to mount it on something. So I found a brass cuff and I glued it onto it, and I think it turned out really cool. So what you're going to need for this project is you're going to need some thread. I'm going to use FireLine 0.006. You're going to need a brass cuff or something else you want to mount the actual bracelet on. 5 12mm 2-hole pyramid beads. You'll see they've got their 2 holes in them. 6 8mm 2-hole pyramid beads. A tube of half Tilas. And then you'll need some needles, a pair of scissors, some E6000 glue, and something to apply that glue. This is going to be a 2-needle method stitch again, so we're going to use 2 needles at once. So with this particular project, you don't want to have to go back and add extra thread as you go along, so I'd make sure you cut yourself a good 7 feet to start with. If you're mounting this on something else and you want to make it longer, make sure you add extra thread in this beginning stage. So go ahead and thread a needle onto each end. One little tip is sometimes I like to take the end of the thread. You'll see me do this often in videos, and I just put it between my 2 fingers and with my nail on the thread, and I pull, and it flattens the thread just enough so that it'll easily go through the eye of the needle. All right, so we want to be able to have a manageable amount to work with. That should be about right. Just pull it down a little bit. Okay, so to begin, pick up a half Tila and scoot it down to the midway point on your thread, and pick up a second one. And make these loop, and now go up through the first one. I'm still just using 1 needle at this point. Okay, so I made a loop. There we go. And now go back down through that needle again. And I apologize, I don't really have technical terms for what I'm doing here. I kind of just made this up as I went. I mean, this feels a little bit like a ladder stitch right here, but it's going to change as we go. So now I've got 2 Tilas anchored together, and I'm going to go back up through it again. And then now I'm going to start with my second needle because I want both threads exiting the same side, but I wanted to go through them a couple times to make sure that they're secure. All right, so we've got our 2 needles exiting the same side, and this is pretty well secured in there. So now we're going to pick up our first pyramid, and we're just going to go through each of the holes with a needle. So we've got both needles going through, pull it down. So we've anchored it like so. Now what we want to do is pick up another half Tila on each needle and pull those down. Now because these have 2 holes, we're going to go through the second hole with the same needle we loaded it in on. And now we're going to add 3 more. And soon you're going to see why I ended up having to mount this onto the cuff, because it is pretty darn wobbly. I think it's a really cool design, but it's not something that can stand on its own. Now I'm going to go back through the second hole of that first half Tila I secured. And now up through the pyramid again. Through the half Tila and out. And we're going to do that on the other side. And you can see this is really wobbly, but look, this is what we're making here. It's starting to evolve. So now we're going to do that on the other side as well. So remember we had added that half Tila. So we're going to go through it as well. So down that second hole. So now we're on the other side. We're going to pick up 3 more half Tilas and go back down through the bottom half Tila. There we go, and we made our second side. You just kind of have to work with these. They are going to be wobbly, don't worry about it. When you glue them down, they're going to glue straight. So now we're going back up through the pyramid. And that half Tila we started with up at the top, and pull. All right, so we have 1 unit. So now to secure these just a little bit more on this stage, because this is really going to be our anchor, we're going to go down through the half Tila on the other side and pull it, and then go back up through it. Okay, pull that together. Do that on the other side as well. So down, back up. Okay, so we have 1 complete unit. Now it's going to get a little bit easier. The starting is always the trickiest, so now it's going to go faster. So now we need to add a 12mm pyramid. Slide that on. Both needles go through it. Now we're going to add, let me pull some of these guys over here. So add a half Tila, an 8mm pyramid. Make sure the pointed end is facing up, and another half Tila. Pull down. Do the same on the other side. Half Tila, go through your pyramid, another half Tila, there we go. Okay, so now we're going to build our sides. So down through the second hole, kind of work with your fingers to pull that snug. Add 3 half Tilas, and then pick this guy up, go through the second hole, like so. Don't worry again if they're wobbly. Now go up through all of your midway holes and that pyramid, and pull, and you can kind of pull it tight and scoot it down so it rests nice and snug against the 12mm pyramid. So we're going to do that again on the other side. And up through all of them and out. At this point, pull both your threads good and tight. I want to show you something because I don't want you to think you're making a mistake as you go. You'll see that these here, the mid ones, are nice and close together, and these ones have a little gap. I chose to leave that for its design aesthetic. Also, it's so much easier to weave this. If you wanted to, each little increment, you could go back and do the whole loop around, make sure your threads come out so that they're nice and tight like you did right here. It's a lot more work, and I actually think it looks really nice to have a little bit of a gap because that's going to show the gold cuff through it. So you'll see on this example, tight, tight, little gap, and so all of the middle ones have that little gap. And when you do this with the contrasting color, it's going to show that little bit of gold through it. So I actually really like that. But if you wanted to, you could do exactly what you did here, where you just took your thread and needle, you went down and then back up and out on with both needles. All right, so I'm going to keep going. So I'm just going to repeat the same step over again. So now we need to add another large pyramid, both needles, again making sure the point of the pyramid is facing up. I'm going to do one more of these clusters for you, and then I'm going to finish the rest off camera until I get to the end, and then I'll show you how to do that. If you have a beading mat, it's actually really handy to just stick your needles in the beading mat as you go. Add my 3. Back up. One side done. Repeat on the other side. Go back down through your half Tila. Pull snug. And back up through all of them again. There we go. Pull all of them snug. And this is what we've got so far. I'm going to do the rest off camera until I get to this very last cluster. So with this particular bracelet, I want to make it so that I've got an end total of 6 of the small pyramids and 5 of the large ones. And so I'm going to do that off camera, and I'll come back and then I'll show you how to finish it off and actually attach it to the cuff. All right, so I'm ready to add my last cluster here. And so we're going to do a little something different than what we did with the other ones that were in the mid section. So go ahead, add a half Tila to each needle and slide it down. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our right needle and go through the half Tila on the other side and back up through the one we started with. So we're making a loop. And we're going to do that with the other needle as well. Go through the half Tila on the other side and back up. So our threads are facing in the correct direction to add a pyramid, and we have a gap. So we're just going to pull our piece down. I'm just pushing it with my fingernail, and that's going to pull it tight. So now we have 2 half Tilas right up against each other versus having that gap in the middle. And this is just so that's a little bit more secure on the ending here. All right, untangle your needles. Go up through your pyramid bead, both needles. Add a half Tila to each, slide them down, and now we're going to do the exact same thing that we just did before, because we want those to be tight together. So my right needle, I'm going to go through the half Tila on the other side, back up and out, and repeat. And then we have that gap, so make sure that you just pull them down so it's nice and tight. You just spread these apart. And this is really why we're gluing this onto the cuff, because you can see it's really quite wobbly. It's a pretty design, but it just doesn't really stand on its own, so it really needs that cuff. Okay, so now we just need to add our sides. We'll do that same way we did before. Pick up 3. Okay, go through that half Tila. So we got one side. Now we're just going to go back. Up and out. And do that on the other side. I love these 2-hole beads, and I really like using a double needle method with them. For me, it's just a lot easier. It just seems to make sense. You've got 2 holes, so why not have 2 needles? We just got to go now up through it all again. And back out and pull tight. We finished our bead weaving. You can see I have a little gap here. I'm not going to worry about that because when I glue it onto the cuff, it's going to cinch up. But we do need to tie off our threads. To do so, go ahead and start working your thread tail back into your beadwork. And I'm just going to tie a knot. Just like so. Oops. I want to make sure it doesn't get caught on one of those side beads, like so. Just going to work that tail in. Go back up through. And then I'm going to shoot it down. I'm actually going to go through that big pyramid as well. And you can go anywhere you want on here. And so I'm going to do this with my other one. You're basically just trying to incorporate that tail into your beadwork and tie knots here and there to secure your thread. It's really at this point, as long as you follow your thread path, you're fine. You just wouldn't want to say like try to tie a knot on the end here of one of those other 2-hole beads. So just discrete little knots. Okay, so just keep working your tail in and tying knots as you go until you feel it's secure. And then we are going to, of course, reinforce all of this with glue so that you're not going to have to worry about it being too wobbly or anything like that. It's going to become very solid and very stable. I finished the bead weaving portion of my bracelet, and as you can see, it's pretty wobbly. I really love this design, but I don't really think it's something that would stand alone because you're going to see what happens is these are going to fold under, they're going to move around. So to stabilize it, I want to attach it to a brass cuff, which is what I did here in this example. And to do so, I just am going to use some E6000 glue. The easiest way I found to do this, you're going to see we're going to lay it onto the cuff. And we're going to start by gluing down the middle pyramid first. So we're going to find what looks to be the midway point. So I'm looking to see how much room I have between the end here of my bead weaving and the end of the cuff. I want to have that same amount on both sides. If you really want to, you can measure it out. I'm going to eyeball it though. So I'm going to take the cap off of my E6000. We've used this glue before in the studio, but if you haven't used it, there's a little point on the top side of the cap, and you basically just turn it upside down and break through the seal. Okay, and I've got a little scrap piece of wire as my applicator. So I'm just going to flip this over, and on that middle pyramid, I'm going to spread some glue. Flip it back over and lay it down onto my cuff. At this point, I do want to just double check. I'm just kind of eyeballing it here, that it is centered. Okay, so what I want you to do at this point, and what I'm going to do, is I'm not going to go any further until that middle pyramid is dry. I'm just going to take my spool of FireLine, turn it upside down, and sit my cuff bracelet into it so it'll stand upright. I'm going to double check one more time that it's good and centered on the cuff. And I'm going to let that dry for a good 20 minutes before I come back and start to glue the rest. Now that our middle pyramid is dry, you can see what we've got here. So we have it anchored in the middle, which is what we wanted. And now we're going to start to glue the edges. And we're going to do this actually pretty carefully and slowly. So first, flip all your beads so that they're facing out from the underside. Now we're going to take our glue, and again using a wire applicator, we're going to put glue on the small pyramid itself and just the tips of the half tilas near the pyramid edge. We're also going to do that for the large pyramid. Now I'm not putting a ton of glue because I don't want it to spill out the edges. And I'm going to just do this on the next one as well. There we go. You're going to end up using a lot of glue overall, so you don't need a lot in any one spot. Okay, so now this is where you want to be careful. So flip it over and lay it down in the center of your bracelet. And then flatten out the tilas. And you want to look here and here to see how much room you have to the edge, and that's going to be your guide is if you're centered or not. And when I'm talking centered, I'm meaning from the width, not the length of the bracelet. Okay? Go down. So now what I want you to do is I want you to be patient, even though you want to finish this project. I'm going to let this dry for a good 20 minutes as well. Then you're going to go back, do the exact same thing, flip it over, put glue on the underside here and lay it down, and then repeat on the other side as well. So you actually are going to let this dry in 5 different segments. This is going to be 1, this section here is going to be 1, these are going to be 1, then you're going to go to the other side, these are going to be a segment, and then that's going to be a segment. And it's really worth being patient to make sure that this turns out right. So I'm going to do that myself, and then when I come back on camera, this is actually going to be finished and dry so you can see what the finished piece looks like. But I do want to encourage you to be patient. You know, you've worked hard on this and you want to make sure it turns out. Just make sure you take that time to let each segment dry. And just keep putting it back in your spool. If you don't have a spool, an egg carton would probably work fine as well. You're just making sure that you have something that keeps this upright. I've now glued down both ends and I have the finished piece here I want to show you before I sign off on the video. So you can see it's all tacked down and it's not going to go anywhere. I have this one here too. You can see it's solid and it's really nice and stable, and it creates a really interesting look. So I wanted to show you these two side by side. Here I use the gold beads on the brass cuff, which kind of gives it an interesting look where that blends into it a little bit more. And then here I use these more contrast beads. These look kind of like this light cream color, so they stand out a little bit more. But you can have a lot of fun choosing your different color combos. And then one quick tip is when you make this project and you first begin, so you'll see how this fits on the wrist. I have a particularly narrow wrist. If you do as well, you're going to want to bend the actual brass cuff before you glue the beadwork onto it. And that way it'll just be shaped to fit your wrist before you begin. You wouldn't really want to do that after you glue the beadwork, you don't want to compromise the integrity of the glue or the structure, but that's real easy to just squeeze the cuff a little bit onto your wrist before you begin, but of course make sure you can still easily slip it off. So that's just one quick tip. I hope you enjoyed this project and have a lot of fun making it for yourself. You can find this project and others along with all the ingredients at Beadaholique.com.